Hi everybody, it's Mr. Fossa. Hope you're having a good day. I'm making this video to go along with the slideshow that hopefully you've already watched about landscapes and how to take a flat piece of paper and make it look like some things are further away and some things are closer. This is an unfinished painting I've been working on at home to show a place where kind of behind my backyard when I was a kid, your age. And we used to play in places way back there, and then we came closer and closer and closer to our house, and I'm trying to show that depth. That's what a landscape is really about. And I know that, sometimes we like to draw from imagination and fantasy and abstract kind of stuff. And there's nothing, I'm not saying don't do that, but when the time comes, or when the situation calls for it, you want to know, like, what are the strategies and what are the tricks artists would use to make some things look like they're closer and other things look like they're far away. A little blast from the past, I found a picture that I drew when I was in elementary school. I have no idea why I drew this picture of this Canada goose, or why I made it walking upright like a human. I don't really remember any of that, but I do think it's funny that this picture shows a bunch of things that students do that we're trying to grow out of. Like, number one, do you see how I just drew a ground line down there? And then I just put everything on the ground, like side by side by side by side. We're trying to kind of grow away from that because that just makes it hard to tell, what's close and what's far away. We want to know, is the goose further away than these weeds, or is the goose in front of the weeds? What's behind the goose? Like things like that. So that's what our lesson is really about. If you've had lessons with me in class, some of the things we're talking about today will be familiar to you, which is great. Like, I don't want that to be a turnoff for you. I want that to be something where you go, oh yeah, right, I remember this from second grade, in third grade, because we build on things we know from before, and we don't become experts at anything by trying it only once. We as artists, we look at different ways to try the same kinds of techniques with different subject matter and in different ways. So I hope that would be like an exciting thing for you, that some of the things sound familiar. So for starters, again, I just want to kind of emphasize that the trick is, we live in this three-dimensional world, but our paper's flat. And so we have to find some ways to convince the viewer that they're looking at not a flat piece of paper, but instead a real scene. A great way to start with the landscape is to draw what we call a horizon line. And the horizon line is just a line that goes across your paper. In geography, we think of the horizon as being a line between, say, the ground and the sky, or water and the sky if you're at the beach or something. In our artwork, the horizon is really important. It creates what we call your eye level, which is why a ground line like this is so weird, because it's hard to, it just feels awkward, right? What I mean by eye level is, kind of the perspective, like the angle we're looking at something from. So if you'll see from the slideshow that I made that experimenting with how high or low that line is, can be really interesting. If you put it somewhere in the middle of the paper, that's usually pretty good because it gives you some room down on the ground to draw things, and it also gives you some room up above. So that'd be the first thing, is just to draw a line, which doesn't sound so hard. If you're a younger student, what you might want to do, just to grow, just trying to think, how can I grow past what I used to do? One good way to grow past just drawing a ground line is to think of your ground as being different levels, So instead of only one piece of ground, maybe I've got a few, like a hill and another hill far away, instead of just one piece of ground. So that would be something that you could do. For students who are a little bit older, thinking carefully about where that horizon line goes and how we use it is kind of important. Once you've got that, you want to think, what could be behind the horizon? Well, not a lot. Hills and mountains, that kind of thing makes sense. I have this painting that I was working on, showing, a place where we went canoeing as a family one time, and you can see that there's the horizon line, right? And then what goes above the horizon is hills and mountains. That's a really, really good idea to do something like that. And it's not that hard, and this is where your artistic style comes in, because you could make your mountains look realistic. You could make them look pointy and sharp, like some, really forbidding mountain range that you have to pass over in order to escape from something that's, some monster or something like that. You can make your mountains kind of Dr. Seuss-ish or whatever. However you do it, putting in some things in the distance is really smart, because, not to be too, philosophical about it or whatever, but near and far are opposites. And opposites kind of like need each other, in order to exist. So like, for example, if you got, let's say you bought a new pair of shoes, now you have an old pair of shoes and a new pair of shoes. But if there was no such thing as new shoes, there would be no such thing as old shoes. And again, like, that's just kind of a thing about opposites, like cold and hot, and like a protagonist and an antagonist. They don't exist without each other. So if you don't put anything far, how could there be anything near, right? It's just kind of a thing. So putting something in the distance is always a really good idea. And it doesn't have to be mountains. Maybe there's like a distant city back here with skyscrapers, or it's like the Wizard of it's like Emerald City or whatever. But something in the distance is always really good. It's a really great place to start. As I showed in the slideshow, another just really good trick to use is to create something that comes out from the background, like into the front, into the foreground, like a river or a road or a path or something like that. Because everybody knows, like, when you see something like this, like a road like this, like, everybody in the world knows, roads can't shrink, like, they stay parallel. That's kind of the whole thing. So when they shrink into the distance, our eyes and our brain tell us that they're getting further away. It's super easy to do. All you have to do is put a dot somewhere. Like, what makes sense is to put it on the horizon line somewhere. I put mine right in the middle, which is kind of a traditional thing to do. Then you just draw a couple lines going back. That's how you create that look. Like, maybe you picture this as being train tracks, or it's a road, or it's a river, or something like that. It doesn't have to be in the middle. What you could do, and it's kind of interesting as you grow and try like some different ways. Maybe your road or your river like kind of goes off, to some place, maybe like off to one side of the paper or the other. That'd be something that you could try. That little spot in the distance, fifth graders and above will remember that that's called a vanishing point. It's a pretty important part of your landscape, is like where things kind of go into the distance, like that. Even if we stop there, I think you would see that your paper has some sense of depth now. It's not just a flat piece of paper. Some things are far away, other things are close. So that's kind of a good start. A great idea to think about next is adding different objects into your picture and thinking about the strategies or the tricks that artists use to make them look like they're far away or close. I showed those in the slideshow. So again, if you haven't looked at the slideshow or you forgot, look at the slideshow alongside with this and you can see. It's a really good idea to put in like some kind of human-made objects. The reason, like a fence or something like that. And the reason something like a fence or light posts or something like that, the reason why that works so well is because we all kind of understand that human-made stuff comes in standard sizes, right? Like basketball hoops or fence posts or telephone poles. And so when we see them shrinking like this, like the only way that makes any sense to our brain and our eyes is they must be getting further away. Otherwise, there's no way for us to understand why there's a short little pole down here and there's a long one over here. That's kind of a good way to go. Technically, the way to do that is to pretend you have some strings that are attached to the vanishing point, like the vanishing point's like a nail kind of, and then you make those objects, hit that top string. If you made railings, like if this is a fence with railings, those would head toward the vanishing point also. Notice that objects that are close would maybe be thicker. You could tell if this is for example, a rectangular prism, as a post, versus, back here, you won't see so much detail in that, but those are just some things that you could do. Like a human-made thing works really, really well. Aside from that, you want to think about 3 basic tricks. I mentioned these in the slideshow. Again, one of them is what we call overlapping, which means things are blocking our view. Another one is the size. We know that when things are closer to us, they look bigger. When they're in the distance, they look smaller. And the third one is what we call placement, which is a little tricky to explain it goes along with the other two. It's the idea that when you put things further up on the paper like that, the further up you go, the further away you go. It's like every step up, step up, step up, step up. The further up you go, the further away you go. So whatever you're going to put in your landscape, those three things kind of have to work together. For example, if I'm going to draw something like a tree, which is a really good idea. Trees, it's just one of those things where, like in this picture, you could draw any kind of a shape and you could convince people that it's a tree, right? They don't have to be super like photographically real. They're nice and tall, so they help to balance out the other things that are short. So I would highly recommend, like, there's no law that a landscape has to have trees in it, but something really tall like that is a good idea. And you'll notice that if you start down low on your paper and draw like the tallest shape you could draw. So here's my tree. You can see how it appears to be really, really close because it's big, that's size, and I put it near the bottom of my paper. That's placement. When I go to draw another one, I want to think about those same things. So let's say I made another tree right here. Notice I moved it up on the paper, right? That's a clue to the viewer that it's further away. And you can see that if I make it cross over the other tree, or really under, I should have said, the other tree, notice that's overlapping. So when we see that these branches cover those branches, my brain is telling me, well, this tree must be in front of the other tree. Now I want you to see that that's a really hard thing to do. And even students 6th grade that I work with and above, it's super, super tempting to just put everything side by side by side by side, because you're kind of like look for an empty space, on the ground line where you could put something. That makes it look super fake. In real life, things block our view of other things. We especially make that mistake when we're happy with something we drew. Like, I love this fence. Oh, it's such a great fence. Never drawn a more beautiful fence than this. So my temptation is to draw a tree like right here where it doesn't, interfere with the fence. But in real life, trees don't behave that way. Like, a tree might grow in front of the fence like this. And see that city that I drew that I really loved? The tree doesn't care. Like, the tree's just going to grow in front of the city, and block my view. That's the way to make it look a little bit more true to life. And maybe back here, I might add another tree that goes behind the fence. And do you see how, because this one is in the distance, instead of making it bigger, I made it smaller, right? I'm thinking about my 3 strategies, like overlapping, making things block my view of other things, size, which means, changing, like something far away is going to be smaller, something closer is going to be bigger, and then placement, which is like the fancy way to say, the further up I go on the paper, the further away I'm getting in real life. I showed on the slideshow that a common mistake students make is if they have, student has something like, let's say this is your horizon line. It's very common for students to want to draw things that stay below the horizon line because you don't want to touch it, right? Like, you like it. But when you draw everything that stays below the horizon line, it just makes it look like you're not really in the scene. It looks fake. It doesn't look like a real scene. It sort of looks like you're far away on a hill. So if you can make your objects go above the horizon line, I think that's really a smart thing. Obviously, I need to do some erasing here because I want to show that the trees are in front of the horizon line. I want to show that the tree blocks the fence, stuff like that. That's kind of important. It's also really common for students to want to draw something that they love, like a unicorn or a Mack truck or something like that. And usually what happens with that is it kind of throws it all off, because when you look at a scene like this, you can kind of tell what's close and far away. But if I draw a Mack truck or a unicorn, let's say, and what I end up doing is I'm so focused on drawing this like perfectly, like photographically real unicorn, like the last one I saw. What I end up doing is I mess up the whole scale, because this unicorn is super small compared to the other things around it, like at that level, you know? So when you go to draw your landscape, I wouldn't worry too much about things that take a lot of detail, because it's hard to get that detail to match the scale of other stuff that's going on at that same level. And if you do that, like if you I can't resist, you know, I just love drawing unicorns so much, I cannot stop myself from drawing one. At least when you draw them, think about these 3 strategies. So the unicorn at least could be like hiding behind this tree, you know, and then maybe my next unicorn can be up here in front of this fence. And you can see how what I did was I made it smaller because it's further away. I moved it up, that's placement, and I'm thinking about overlapping, like putting things behind and in front of other stuff. Like those are the ways to create that depth. One thing that I notice when I'm watching students work is that students get tired of drawing one thing. Like you say, okay, I'll draw a tree for you, Mr. Fossa, you told me to draw a tree, I'll draw a tree. But then you get kind of like sick of it. A lot of these strategies, they depend on comparing, you know, like you have to say, well, this tree is big compared to this tree, or this tree is overlapping this tree. And so this tree is further up, you know, than this tree, and they all depend on comparing. So if you only draw one of something, it's very, very hard for the viewer's brain to do any comparing. So I would highly recommend that if you draw one thing, draw like 3 or 4 of those exact same things. So if you're gonna make a unicorn, make 3 or 4, you know, and if you're gonna draw a tree, make 3 or 4. And that way it's easy for the person looking at it to tell using those kind of 3 strategies that we talk about. I think that's it. The key with landscapes, you know, if you want them to look like it's real space, so some things are far away, some things are close, it's that horizon line, that vanishing point, you know, showing something that shrinks into the distance. Adding something made by humans is a really good idea because it clicks in our brain automatically that no human would make like different size fence posts. We make them all the same size. And so when they shrink, we obviously know they're getting further away. When you add other objects, whatever they are, from nature or whatever, use those strategies, like those things, like thinking about overlapping, which to me is the trickiest one because again, like I drew this beautiful goose. I didn't want to cover it up with anything, you know, so I kind of put everything over the side. Like being willing to cover stuff up is super important. Think about changing the size. The further away something goes, the smaller it's going to get. And then finally placement. The further up on the paper you go, the further away something is. I showed on the slideshow, you know, if you are going to color your landscapes, colors in the distance are lighter. There's more air between your eyes and those things way in the distance. You'll see this if you just look around the Santa Clarita Valley, that mountains far away are lighter and softer and fuzzier and grayer. Mountains that are close to you are, you know, like crisper in color. They have more detail. So if you're going to color it, just think about that. Like a mistake I see students make is they start to color the sky and they just like, boom, they go at it like full power with their bluest, brightest crayon. And then that bright color just goes like wham, you know, and forces itself into your face and it makes it look like the sky is closer to you than anything else. So use lighter colors, like light, soft, hazy colors in the distance, crisp, bright, more detailed stuff in the foreground, and it'll be more convincing. Have some fun. As I said in my welcome video a couple weeks ago, draw tons of them, you know, like nobody draws just one landscape and then like checks that off their list. Draw stuff from your imagination, you know, a scene from Mars, a scene from some, you know, futuristic land, a fantasy place you wish you could go, a realistic place that you have been, and just think about those same strategies. That horizon, vanishing point, and then placing those objects in a strategic way. Have fun with it, and remember to send me pictures of your artwork when you finish with it, so I can compliment you. Have a great day, everybody.